It was close to midnight when the rain began to pour harder than before. The streets were nearly empty, the kind of silence that made every sound louder. A young woman walked quickly, clutching her umbrella against the wind. She had just finished her long shift at the hospital and was eager to get home. The city lights reflected off the wet road, creating long streaks of gold and silver. She was tired, the kind of tired that sinks into your bones. But something made her stop. A faint sound cut through the rhythm of the rain. It wasn't a cat or the usual city noise, it was softer, trembling and weak, and she froze, listening carefully. There it was again, a tiny cry. Her heart skipped. It sounded like a baby. She turned toward the sound, following it past a bus stop that had seen better days. The benches were soaked, and the sign creaked in the wind. The sound came from behind a pile of cardboard boxes near a trash bin. She hesitated for a moment, her hands shaking slightly. Who would leave a baby out here? Slowly, she moved the boxes aside. Her breath caught in her throat. Wrapped in a damp, gray blanket was a small baby, no more than a few months old. The child's tiny face was red from the cold, and its hands trembled with every cry. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice breaking. Without thinking, she scooped the baby up and held it close to her chest. The warmth of her coat seemed to calm the child for a moment, but she could feel how cold its skin was. The rain soaked her shoulders as she looked around, hoping someone would appear, maybe a desperate mother coming back, but no one did. The street was empty, and the sound of thunder filled the distance. She looked at the baby again. Its eyes fluttered open briefly, then closed as if too tired to stay awake. Her heart ached. She knew she couldn't just leave it there. She hurried home, holding the baby tightly under her umbrella, her shoes splashing through puddles. When she reached her small apartment, she kicked the door shut behind her and set the baby down gently on the couch. The room was warm, lit by the soft glow of a single lamp. She quickly grabbed a towel and began to dry the baby's tiny hands and face. "There. It's okay. You're safe now," she murmured softly. The baby stopped crying and just stared up at her, blinking slowly. She smiled a little, but inside she was full of questions. Who would leave a baby like this? Where were its parents? She found one of her old hospital blankets and wrapped the baby snugly. Then she heated a small bottle of milk she had kept for emergencies. She sometimes helped mothers at the hospital who couldn't nurse right away. The baby drank slowly, its small mouth making gentle sucking sounds that melted her heart. Once it had finished, she laid it on a soft pillow and called the local emergency number. But the storm had caused a power failure in some areas, and the phone lines were delayed. After several tries, she finally reached a dispatcher, who told her they would send someone as soon as possible, but it might take until morning. She hung up and looked at the clock. It was almost 1 a.m. She sighed and sat on the floor beside the couch, watching the baby sleep. She told herself this was just for the night. Tomorrow the police or social services would take over. She had done her part, but something about the baby made her uneasy. She noticed a small band on its wrist. It wasn't a regular hospital tag. It looked handmade, white, with a silver pattern etched into it, almost like a symbol. She turned it slightly under the lamp. The symbol was strange, nothing she recognized. It wasn't English letters or numbers, just a series of tiny lines and circles, almost like a code. She frowned but didn't think too much of it. Maybe it was a cultural thing, or maybe the parents were from somewhere different. She didn't want to assume. Still, she couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The baby made a soft sound like a sigh, and she felt her chest tighten. It was so small, so helpless. She remembered the night shifts at the hospital when newborns would cry in their clear cribs, and she'd gently rock them until they slept again. But this one, this baby, had no one. As the hours passed, the rain outside softened to a steady drizzle. The woman sat on the couch holding the baby in her arms. She told herself stories in a whisper just to fill the silence. Maybe the baby's parents were in trouble. Maybe they'd left it somewhere safe, hoping someone kind would find it. That thought comforted her a little, But when she looked out the window, she noticed something that made her uneasy again. A car had parked across the street. Its headlights were off, but she could see the shape clearly. It had been there for almost an hour. Maybe it was nothing, she told herself. Maybe just someone waiting out the rain. But still, she closed the curtains. She checked the baby again. The little one was breathing softly now, a tiny rise and fall of its chest. She touched its cheek, and it was warmer now. Relief washed over her. She decided to stay awake until morning, just to be safe. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, listening to the rain again. But as she sat there, her mind wouldn't rest. Why here? Why her street? Why tonight? Her eyes drifted to the small wristband again. The silver lines almost glowed faintly under the lamp. She rubbed her eyes. Maybe it was just the light playing tricks on her. At around 3 in the morning, she finally dozed off on the couch, the baby resting on her chest. When the first light of dawn crept into the room, she woke to the sound of distant sirens. She blinked, her neck stiff, but she felt the warm weight of the baby still in her arms. The baby stirred a little but didn't cry. She smiled sleepily. She got up carefully and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet again. The car was gone. Only wet tire tracks remained on the road. Something about that made her uneasy again. She decided to call the police once more now that the storm had passed. This time, the line connected easily, and the officer on duty took her report. They said they'd send someone to pick up the baby within an hour. She hung up, then turned back to the little one. "Looks like you'll be going to people who can really help," she whispered. But as she said it, her heart sank a little. She didn't want to let go. She had only known this baby for a few hours, but she already felt connected. Maybe it was the way it had clung to her shirt in the night, or the quiet way it seemed to listen when she spoke. An hour passed, but no one came. She called again, and the same voice told her they were delayed because of a nearby accident. It might take longer. She sighed and tried to keep herself busy. She changed the baby's blanket and noticed again how the symbol on the wristband caught the light. She couldn't help but take a closer look this time. It wasn't just a pattern. It looked like something carefully designed, precise. She felt a chill run through her. Then she noticed something else. On the inside of the band, in very faint letters, was a short code, something like R21. She didn't know what it meant, but it didn't seem random. She gently took the baby's tiny hand and whispered, "Who are you, little one?" The baby blinked, and for a brief moment it almost looked like it recognized her voice. It wasn't possible, but she felt it. A strange calm, as if the baby knew she was safe. Hours went by. She fed the baby again, changed it, and kept it close. The police still hadn't arrived. Around noon, she decided to step outside for a moment to see if anyone was coming. The sky was clearing up now, the smell of rain still in the air. She looked down the street. That's when she saw the same car again, black tinted windows parked a few houses away. Her stomach tightened. She turned quickly and went back inside, locking the door behind her. She peered through the curtain, trying not to panic. Someone was in that car, and they were watching her apartment. She took a deep breath and held the baby close. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. The baby stayed calm, looking up at her with wide eyes. She didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a lost baby. Something about this child, about that bracelet, about the car outside. It all felt connected. That night, as she sat awake with the baby in her arms, she realized something deep inside her had changed. She had found this child by accident, but now she couldn't imagine walking away. And even though she didn't yet understand the truth, a quiet voice in her heart whispered that this was only the beginning. The next morning came quietly, but her heart didn't rest. The baby was still sleeping peacefully on the couch, wrapped in a clean blanket. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, filling the room with a calm warmth. For a moment, it almost felt like everything was normal, but the uneasiness from the night before hadn't gone away. She moved to the window and carefully peeked outside. The black car that had been parked across the street was gone. The road was empty now, only a few neighbors passing by with umbrellas from the light drizzle. She tried to convince herself it had been nothing, maybe just someone stuck during the storm. Still, the memory of those dark windows watching her made her stomach twist. She looked back at the baby. Its tiny hand had found the edge of the blanket, holding it like a treasure. The sight made her smile in spite of everything. She gently brushed her fingers through the baby's soft hair. "You really are something, huh?" she whispered. Her phone buzzed. It was the local police finally returning her call from the night before. The officer apologized for the delay and said someone would be sent within the next hour. She gave them her address again and ended the call, feeling both relieved and uncertain. An hour passed, then another. No one came. She began to feel frustrated. She knew how busy things could get after a storm, but it didn't make sense that no one had shown up. Out of habit, she checked the baby's temperature and breathing. Everything seemed fine, though she couldn't stop glancing at that strange wristband. The symbol on it shimmered faintly when light hit it just right. The small letters inside R21 still made no sense. It didn't look like anything she'd seen in hospitals. She thought about calling her old coworker, a nurse who worked in a nearby town. Maybe she could help identify where the bracelet came from. She made the call, keeping her voice calm even though she felt anxious. "Hey," she said softly. "I found a baby last night. Outside in the rain." Her friend gasped on the other end. "What, are you serious? Is the baby okay?" "Yes, the baby's fine," she replied. "But there's something strange. There's a band around its wrist. Not a normal hospital tag. It's white and silver with a code R21. Ever heard of something like that?" There was silence for a moment. Then her friend said, "That doesn't sound like anything we use. Maybe it's from a private facility, or maybe an old clinic. I don't know. You should probably contact social services directly." She thanked her and ended the call. Her mind was spinning. A private facility? What kind of place used bracelets like that? The baby stirred, making a soft sound. She went over quickly, lifted it gently, and started humming. The baby's eyes opened wide and curious. For a second, it almost looked like it was trying to study her face. There was something unusually calm about its gaze, like it understood more than a baby should. She smiled nervously. "You really are a mystery." After feeding and changing the baby, she decided to take a walk to clear her head. The rain had stopped completely and the air smelled fresh. She put the baby in a small stroller she had bought years ago for visiting relatives and stepped outside. The streets were quiet. Neighbors waved politely and she smiled back, pretending everything was normal. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She headed toward the small grocery store on the corner. On the way, she noticed something strange again. A man sitting in a parked car pretending to read a newspaper. He looked up briefly as she passed, his eyes following her for a second too long. Her pulse quickened. She turned into the store quickly, pretending to browse the shelves. Her hands were trembling slightly as she picked up a few essentials. Baby wipes, milk, a pack of diapers. She paid at the counter, her mind racing. When she came out, the car was gone. Back at home, she double-checked her door locks. Everything looked fine, but her instincts told her something wasn't. She placed the baby in the crib and sat beside it, her mind running in circles. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe whoever left the baby behind just wanted it to be safe. But if that was true, why would someone watch her house? She decided to dig a little deeper. She had kept some old contacts from her hospital days, people who worked with children's records. Maybe one of them could quietly check if any baby had been reported missing recently. She made the call, keeping her voice low. The man she called, an old colleague, listened carefully and agreed to help. "I'll check what I can," he said. "But if you found a baby with no ID, you should really be careful who you tell. You never know what kind of situation you've walked into." That made her heart pound faster. Later that evening, the baby started fussing again, crying softly. She picked it up and held it close, pacing the room slowly. She hummed until the crying stopped. The baby looked up at her again, calm and curious. That was when she noticed something that made her pause. The baby's eyes were unusual. Not in a frightening way, but there was something strange about the color. They were a light shade that seemed to shift slightly under the light, sometimes gray, sometimes blue. It wasn't normal, but it was beautiful. She brushed it off as a trick of the lighting and kissed the baby's forehead. "You're just special, that's all," she whispered. That night, she tried to sleep but couldn't. The sound of a car passing outside made her sit up instantly. She walked quietly to the window. Nothing there. When she turned back, the baby was awake again, staring at her. It wasn't crying, just watching. Somehow, that gave her comfort. The next morning, she finally got a call from her colleague. His voice sounded tense. "I checked through hospital databases," he said. "No reports of any missing infant matching your description. But there's something else," she frowned. "What is it?" He hesitated. "That code you mentioned, R21, I found it in some old records. It wasn't from a hospital. It was from a research facility that shut down a few years ago. A private one. They had some kind of incident that led to an investigation. But everything was sealed off. Officially, it doesn't exist anymore." Her throat went dry. "A research facility?" "Yes," he said. "And I'd be careful. Those kinds of places usually don't like people asking questions." She hung up slowly, her mind in chaos. A research facility? Why would a baby have a tag from there?
And what kind of research involved infants?
She looked at the baby sleeping peacefully in the crib. The thought that this tiny, innocent life might be connected to something dark made her heart ache. Hours later, she decided to visit the old part of town where many abandoned buildings stood. Maybe she could find out more about this supposed facility. She put the baby in the stroller again, wrapped it warmly, and headed out. After a long walk, she reached a part of the city she hadn't visited in years. The air felt heavier here. Old signs hung crooked and walls were covered in faded paint. Then she saw it, a large metal gate, rusted and chained shut. Behind it stood an old building with broken windows and weeds growing through the cracks. A faded board on the wall had letters barely visible. Ravendale Medical Research Unit. Her stomach turned. The R could stand for Ravendale. The number 21, maybe a project or patient number. She stood there, gripping the stroller handle tightly. The place looked long abandoned, but she could feel it. The air carried a heaviness that told her this place had secrets. She turned to leave, deciding not to stay any longer. But just as she did, she noticed a movement in the corner of her eye. A figure in a black jacket stood by a car nearby, watching her silently. Her heartbeat raced. Without thinking, she turned the stroller and started walking quickly down the street. The man didn't follow, but she could feel his gaze until she turned the corner. When she reached home, she locked the door again and held the baby close. She didn't know who those people were or what they wanted, but one thing was clear. They knew about the baby. That night, she sat quietly beside the crib. The baby's small chest rose and fell gently. She whispered softly, "I don't know where you came from or why they want you, but I won't let anyone hurt you." For the first time in a long while, she felt something powerful. Purpose. The sound of rain began again outside, tapping gently on the window. She stayed awake for hours, her thoughts turning over and over. The strange bracelet. The black car. The closed-down research building. She didn't know what the truth was yet, but deep inside she could feel it coming closer, like a storm she couldn't avoid. As the baby slept peacefully in her arms, she realized that her quiet life was over. The moment she found that child in the rain, everything had changed. And whatever secret was hidden behind that tiny wristband, it was only beginning to show itself. The next few days passed in a blur. The woman barely slept. Every small sound made her heart jump, every shadow near the window made her nervous. She kept the curtains closed most of the time, holding the baby close as if her arms alone could protect it from the world. Each morning, she woke to the same feeling, that she was being watched. She'd step to the window, pretending to tidy the curtain and look outside. Some days there was a car parked too long. Other days a man she didn't recognize would walk by slowly, pretending to check his phone. She tried to tell herself she was imagining it, but deep down she knew it wasn't her imagination. The baby was growing stronger. Its eyes followed her every move, and it smiled more now. Those little smiles were the only thing keeping her calm. They made her forget for a few seconds that her life had quietly slipped into something strange and uncertain. Still, the questions never left her mind. Who were those people following her? And what exactly was the truth behind that abandoned research place? One afternoon, while the baby was napping, she opened her laptop and searched the name she had seen on the old building. Ravendale Medical Research Unit. At first, nothing came up. Then, Buried deep in old news archives, she found a small article from several years ago. It said that the facility had been shut down after allegations of unethical research. No details. No names, just a short statement about investigations and missing records. She read it over and over, hoping to find something else, but that was all. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through related stories. A few mentioned disappearances of infants from hospitals around the same time. It was never proven, but rumors spread that the facility had taken part in special medical trials. The words made her stomach tighten. She shut the laptop and looked over at the crib. The baby was still sleeping peacefully, its small chest rising and falling like the rhythm of calm waves. She whispered, "What did they do to you?" The next day, she decided to take a small risk. There was an old police officer she knew from her hospital days. He had retired a few years back, but he used to work on child welfare cases. Maybe he would remember something. She waited until evening, wrapped the baby warmly, and went to his small home on the other side of town. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind where everyone knew each other. The old man opened the door and looked surprised to see her. "I need your help," she said quietly. He invited her inside, and she told him everything, from finding the baby in the rain to the strange bracelet and the black car outside her home. He listened without interrupting, his brows furrowing deeper with each word. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, silent for a moment. "I remember that place," he said finally. "Ravendale. They shut it down after a scandal. It wasn't public, but people inside knew something was wrong. Files went missing. Cases got closed without answers." Her voice shook as she asked, "Do you know what kind of research they did?" He hesitated. There were rumors. They were studying genetic resistance, some kind of experiment about immunity. But they never shared results. When the government stepped in, everything disappeared overnight. "I tried to investigate once, but my boss told me to drop it." She swallowed hard. "Do you think this baby came from there?" The old man sighed. "It's possible. That bracelet code sounds like their format. If that's true, then you need to be very careful. If someone's watching you, it's not just curiosity. They might be trying to cover up something that never should have happened." Her heart raced. "What should I do?" He looked at her kindly. "You said you called the police already. If they haven't shown up, it's better you don't wait for them anymore. Keep the baby safe and gather what evidence you can. I'll reach out to a friend of mine who worked in archives. Maybe we can find more." She thanked him, holding back tears. When she stepped back out into the night, she noticed a black car parked across the street again. She froze for a second. The driver didn't move, didn't look her way, but she could feel the tension in the air. She quickly turned down another road, walking faster. Her arms tightened around the baby. The streetlights flickered as she passed. When she looked back, the car was gone. That night, she barely slept. Every creak in the house made her sit up straight. She knew now, whoever wanted the baby wasn't going to give up easily. The following morning, she got a call from the retired officer. "I found something," he said quietly. "Meet me at the small cafe near the river in an hour. And don't tell anyone." She got ready quickly, fed the baby, and put it in the stroller. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from fear. She kept checking behind her as she walked. The cafe was quiet, only a few people sitting by the windows. The old man was already there, a folder in front of him. He smiled faintly when she sat down. "I had my friend look through old reports," he said. This is what he found. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents, blurred and faded, but still readable. They listed medical subjects from the Ravendale facility. Each one had a code number. Her eyes widened when she saw it, R21. Beside the code was a brief note. "Subject shows high-level immunity response. Transfer pending." Her hands shook. This is the baby's code," he nodded. "It looks like the baby was part of an experiment that never got completed." "The others," he stopped himself. "Well, the records of the others are gone." She felt a lump in her throat. "So what happens now?" The old man lowered his voice. "You need to leave town for a while. Someone doesn't want this getting out. I can contact a journalist I trust. She used to report on cases like this before she was forced out. Maybe she can help expose what really happened." Before she could respond, the cafe door opened. A man in a dark coat walked in, his eyes scanning the room. She didn't know why, but her heart immediately told her. He was looking for her. The old man noticed too. "Go," he whispered. "Now." She stood up, her pulse racing, and headed toward the back door. She didn't dare look back. Outside, she pushed the stroller quickly down the alley, turning corner after corner until the cafe was far behind. She finally stopped near a bus stop, catching her breath. The baby began to whimper softly. She knelt down and whispered, "It's okay, we're okay." But she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. Her phone buzzed. A message from the old officer. "Don't come home. They know your address. Stay somewhere safe tonight." Her heart sank. She had nowhere else to go. She decided to head toward the old part of town again, where few people lived. She remembered an empty apartment building where she used to visit a friend years ago. Maybe one of the rooms was still unlocked. It was already getting dark by the time she reached it. The building looked even older than she remembered. Walls cracked, windows covered with dust. She found a room that was still intact and went inside, locking the door behind her. The baby had fallen asleep, its small hand resting against her chest. She sat on the floor beside the wall, hugging the child close. The silence was heavy. As the hours passed, she thought about everything that had happened. She had found a baby in the rain, a helpless child left behind. But now that baby carried a secret tied to something powerful and dangerous. She touched the silver band on its wrist again. The strange design glowed faintly under the dim light, just like before. Maybe it wasn't just a hospital tag. Maybe it was something meant to track or identify. Her mind was spinning, but one thought stayed clear. She couldn't let anyone take the baby. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound from outside the door. A quiet footstep. Then another. Her breath caught. She stood up, holding the baby tightly. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the hallway. Then slowly they faded away. She waited a long time before relaxing. Her hands were still trembling. She whispered softly, "I won't let them find you. I promise." The baby stirred, opening its eyes for a moment before drifting back to sleep. By dawn, she decided what she had to do next. She couldn't keep hiding. She had to uncover the truth, not just for the baby, but for everyone who might have been hurt by whatever had happened at that place. She packed a small bag, wrapped the baby carefully, and stepped out into the morning light. The sky was clear again, the city slowly waking up. She didn't know where her path would lead now, but deep inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in days: determination. Whatever secret Ravendale had tried to bury, she was going to bring it into the light, and no matter what it took, she would protect the child who had changed her life forever. The morning was quiet, but her mind wasn't. The city looked peaceful, but she could no longer see it that way. Every corner, every sound, every passing car made her uneasy. She felt like someone could be watching her even when the street looked empty. The baby was still asleep in her arms, its soft breathing giving her the only sense of calm she had left. She had decided she wouldn't hide anymore. She would find out what the truth was, no matter what it cost her. She didn't know where to start, but she remembered what the old officer had said. There was a journalist who once worked on cases like this before being silenced. If anyone could help her, it was that person. After asking around quietly through a few old contacts, she found a name and a small clue. An office address on the edge of town, near the docks. She packed what little she had, wrapped the baby carefully, and left before sunrise. The streets were cold and mostly empty. She caught a bus heading across town, keeping her head low, glancing at the windows now and then. The baby stayed calm, its small hand clutching her sleeve as if to reassure her. When she got off the bus, the air smelled faintly of the sea. The building she found was old and quiet, the kind of place people forgot existed. A small sign outside read simply, "Community News." She hesitated before walking in. Inside, the office was dusty, filled with stacks of old newspapers and a single desk lamp that flickered. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 40s, typing slowly on a laptop. She looked up as the visitor entered, her eyes sharp but tired. "Can I help you?" she asked. The young woman hesitated. I was told you used to work on government cases, things that were covered up." The woman behind the desk studied her for a long moment. "Who sent you?" "An old officer," she replied. "He said you might listen." That made the journalist pause. Then she gestured toward the chair. "Close the door." Once seated, the woman took a deep breath and told her everything: how she found the baby in the rain, the strange wristband, the people following her, and the abandoned research facility. The journalist didn't interrupt once. She listened carefully, occasionally jotting down notes. When the story ended, there was a heavy silence. Finally, the journalist said softly, "Ravendale. I thought that name was gone for good. I wrote about them once, years ago. They were doing experiments under a private contract, but it was all shut down after a child went missing. The people funding it were powerful, too powerful. My article never got printed. They called it fake news and took away my license." The young woman looked down. "Then you know what I'm saying is real?" "Yes," the journalist said quietly. "But you're in danger. If the child you found is connected to them, it means they're still operating somehow. And if they've been watching you, it's because they know you found something they don't want anyone to see." The baby made a small sound, waking up. The journalist glanced at it, her expression softening. "May I?" she asked. The woman nodded. The journalist leaned closer, gently lifting the baby's wrist to look at the band. She traced the symbol with her finger, frowning. "This isn't random," she said. "It's part of a coded sequence, probably for tracking or identification. It's meant to be recognized only by their system." The woman's heart pounded. "Can they find us through it?" The journalist hesitated. "Maybe. If it's electronic inside, yes, but we can remove it carefully." She opened a drawer and took out a small tool. With steady hands, she loosened the tiny latch at the back of the band. There was a faint click and the band slipped off. Inside there was a thin metallic chip, no larger than a fingernail. "There," she said softly. "Now they can't trace you easily. But they'll realize the signal went dark soon. We need to move fast. Move where?" the woman asked nervously. The journalist stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a folder filled with old documents. "I still have copies of the old reports. Names, places, project notes. There's one address that keeps showing up. A warehouse that used to be registered under Ravendale's suppliers. It's about 30 miles from here, near the hills. If the facility really shut down, that might be where they moved everything." The woman hesitated.
"You want to go there?"
"I want to see what they're hiding," the journalist replied. "If we get proof, we can force this story into the light. No one can bury it again." The young woman looked at the baby, who was now staring quietly at both of them, as if it understood. She nodded slowly. "I'll go." That night they left together. The journalist drove an old gray car that looked like it had seen better years, but it was quiet and reliable. The road stretched long and empty, lined with dark trees that swayed in the wind. The baby slept in the back seat, bundled warmly. As they drove, the journalist explained what she knew. Ravendale started out as a medical research group. They were supposed to develop cures for rare immune disorders, but then they started experimenting with genetic changes, ways to make humans resistant to diseases altogether. The project was shut down after someone leaked that they were using unauthorized subjects. "Unauthorized?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. The journalist nodded grimly. "Infants. They took them from hospitals. Most were never found." The woman felt cold all over. She looked at the baby, who was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm that surrounded its life. They reached the warehouse close to midnight. It stood in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by tall fences and thick trees. The metal gate was locked, but part of the fence was bent enough for them to slip through. The inside was dark and smelled of dust and rust. They used small flashlights to move carefully between stacks of old crates and papers. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly. "Over here," the journalist whispered. She pointed to a large metal cabinet with faded letters on it. They pried it open, revealing rows of old folders. Many were empty, but some still had papers. The woman picked one up and froze. It had a chart labeled Subject R21. Underneath were notes, medical readings, immune responses, and a small photo of a newborn baby. The code matched exactly. Her hands shook as she whispered, "This is the baby." The journalist leaned closer, reading fast. "Look, these notes say the subject showed complete resistance to infections and toxins. They wanted to replicate it. They called it the key to controlled immunity." Before they could read further, they heard something outside, the sound of a car door closing. Both women froze. "Someone's here," the journalist whispered. They turned off their flashlights and crouched behind a stack of crates. Through a crack in the wall, they saw headlights flashing across the yard. Two men got out, both wearing dark coats. One held a small scanner, the other a flashlight. "They must have tracked the signal before we removed the band," the journalist whispered. The woman held the baby close, her heart pounding so loud she thought they'd hear it. The baby stirred but didn't cry. The men entered the warehouse, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. One of them walked dangerously close to their hiding spot. The journalist mouthed silently, "Stay still." The minutes felt like hours. Then one of the men spoke. "Signal's gone cold." They were here, though. Check the files. Maybe they took something. They began opening drawers and flipping through folders. Papers fluttered to the ground. The journalist grabbed the woman's hand and pointed toward a small side door at the back. They moved slowly, crouched low, making no sound. When the men turned toward another corner, they slipped out the door and ran into the trees behind the building. Branches scratched their arms as they ran, but they didn't stop. The woman clutched the baby tight against her chest, whispering, "Almost there, just a little farther." After what felt like forever, they reached the car parked by the main road. They jumped in, breathless. The journalist started the engine and drove off fast, the warehouse lights fading behind them. They didn't speak for several minutes. The sound of the engine and the baby's soft breathing filled the silence. Finally, the journalist said, "We have enough. Those files are proof. I copied what I could." She held up a small drive. "If we can get this to the right hands, they can't silence us anymore." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. "We have to tell the world." The journalist glanced at the baby in the rearview mirror. "This child, it's not just a victim. It's the proof they can't hide." The story begins with this baby. They drove through the night, heading toward the city again. But the woman knew this wasn't over. Whoever was chasing them wouldn't stop now. They had seen too much. Still, as she looked down at the baby's calm face, she felt something new. A quiet strength she didn't know she had. She wasn't just running anymore. She was fighting for the truth. The road stretched on ahead, long and dark, but for the first time she didn't feel afraid of it. She had a purpose, a reason to keep going. And deep down, she knew the truth was closer than ever. The city lights looked different that night. Maybe it was the way the rain blurred them, or maybe it was because her eyes were tired from all the running. She had been awake for nearly 2 days, but her mind wouldn't rest. The baby slept peacefully in the back seat, wrapped in the same blanket from that first stormy night when she had found it. They had the drive with the evidence. They had the truth. But they also knew the people chasing them had money, power, and the kind of connections that could erase anyone without leaving a trace. The journalist gripped the steering wheel tightly. "We can't go back home," she said quietly. "If we stop moving, they'll find us. Then what do we do?" The woman asked, her voice trembling. "We make sure this story goes out. We find someone who can publish it before they can silence us. Once it's public, they can't hide anymore." The woman looked out the window. The streets were empty. The sound of the rain against the car roof was steady, like a slow heartbeat. She turned toward the baby. "It's strange," she whispered. "I found this child by accident. But now I feel like it was meant to happen." The journalist nodded softly. Maybe it was. Sometimes fate doesn't ask for permission. They reached a small motel on the edge of the highway just before dawn. It was quiet and half empty, the kind of place people stopped at only when they had nowhere else to go. They took a small room and tried to rest for a while. When the woman finally sat on the bed, she realized how exhausted she was. The baby stirred in her arms but didn't cry. Instead, it opened its eyes and looked straight at her. Those eyes were clear and calm, almost too aware for such a small child. She smiled weakly. "You're stronger than both of us," she whispered. The journalist set up her laptop and plugged in the small drive. "If we're lucky, we can send this to a few independent reporters I still trust. Once they get it, even if something happens to us, the story will spread." But before she could hit send, the screen froze. Then it flickered. The woman frowned. "What happened?" The journalist's face tightened. "They're trying to block the signal. They must have traced the network somehow." A loud sound came from outside, the crunch of tires on gravel. Both women looked at each other. "They found us," the journalist whispered. The woman grabbed the baby and held it close. "What do we do now?" The journalist moved quickly, unplugging the laptop and stuffing the drive into her coat pocket. "There's a back door. We can make it to the next street if we move fast." They ran through the narrow hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath their feet. Outside, the morning light was starting to break through the clouds. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick and heavy. They ran across a small parking lot, heading toward a row of old houses. Behind them, they heard doors slam and voices shouting. "This way," the journalist said, leading them into a narrow alley. They ducked behind a fence and slipped through a small gate that opened into someone's backyard. The woman could feel her heart racing. The baby pressed its face against her shoulder, sensing the tension. After what felt like hours of running, they finally reached an old train station that looked abandoned. The place was quiet except for the distant hum of trains passing far away. They went inside, breathing hard. The journalist checked her watch. "We bought some time," she said, "but we can't keep running forever. We need a way to make sure the world sees what we have." The woman looked around the station, her eyes falling on a public phone by the wall. It was old, but it looked like it still worked. "Can you send the files another way?" she asked. The journalist's eyes lit up with an idea. "There's a contact I used to work with, someone overseas. If I can reach him, he can upload everything to a global network. Once it's there, no one can take it down." She dialed quickly, her hands shaking. The line clicked, then a rough voice answered. She spoke in a low tone, explaining who she was and what she had. The voice on the other end went silent for a moment, then said, "Send it now. I'll handle the rest." She smiled faintly and hung up. "It's done. Now we just have to get to a place with a satellite connection. There's a small radio tower near the east side of the city. If we can reach it, the data will go through." The woman nodded. She looked at the baby and whispered, "Hold on, little one. Just a little longer." They started walking again, staying close to shadows, avoiding busy streets. The city around them was waking up, unaware of the storm building in secret corners. By noon, they reached the hill where the radio tower stood. It was tall and rusty, surrounded by a wire fence. The gate was locked, but the journalist managed to squeeze through a gap. They climbed up a short slope until they reached the small control room at the base of the tower. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old metal. There was an old computer connected to a transmitter. The journalist worked quickly, plugging in the drive and connecting the cables. The screen flickered, then a small bar appeared showing the upload starting. "It's working," she said, relief in her voice. The woman stood near the window, rocking the baby gently. For a brief moment, she felt a strange peace. Maybe this was it. Maybe the nightmare would finally end. But then the faint sound of engines grew louder. She turned and saw 2 black cars speeding up the hill. "They're here," she said, her voice breaking. The journalist looked up at the progress bar. It was only halfway done. "We need more time." The woman's eyes darted around. "There's a small shed outside. I can hide with the baby while you finish." "No," the journalist said quickly. "They want the child, you go. I'll keep them busy." The woman hesitated, but there was no time to argue. She nodded and ran out the back door, clutching the baby. She ducked behind the shed just as the cars stopped outside. Voices shouted. Footsteps approached. The journalist stood her ground inside the control room. "It's over," she said firmly. "The world will know what you did." The men demanded the drive, but she didn't move. "You're too late," she said softly. The upload reached 100%. The screen flashed a small message. Data sent successfully. She smiled faintly even as they grabbed the equipment. "You can destroy everything here," she said. "But it's already gone." Outside, the woman waited in silence, her heart pounding. She heard the cars start again, then fade into the distance. When it was safe, she returned to the tower. The control room was a mess. Papers and wires were scattered everywhere. The journalist's coat lay on the chair. On the floor, she found the small notebook where the journalist had written everything. Names, places, codes. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you." She held the baby close and walked down the hill. The sky had cleared and the sun was breaking through the clouds. For the first time in days, the light felt warm. By the next morning, the news broke everywhere. Headlines spread across the internet, television, and radio. Illegal genetic experimentation exposed. Missing infants case reopened. Anonymous source reveals government scandal. People were shocked. Investigations began. The truth that had been buried for years was now impossible to hide. The project was exposed, and the people behind it were arrested one by one. The woman stayed hidden for a while, but she watched the world change quietly from a small safe house provided by one of the journalist's contacts. The baby was safe now, sleeping peacefully beside her. Months passed. The story became global news. The baby, known only by the code on its file, was moved into protective care. Scientists confirmed what the documents had said. It carried a rare genetic resistance that could help develop cures for dangerous diseases. But this time, everything was done ethically under full protection of law. The woman was offered a chance to live a new life, away from the noise and danger. She accepted, but she never forgot. She still kept the small bracelet that once carried the tracking chip. It was a reminder of how one rainy night had changed everything. Years later, she stood by the window of a small house near the countryside. The baby, now a cheerful little boy, played outside in the garden. He had no idea about the darkness that once surrounded his life. He only knew warmth, laughter, and safety. Sometimes the woman would sit quietly and watch him, wondering what kind of person he would become. Maybe one day he would learn the truth. Maybe he would understand that his life had once been the center of a secret too big for anyone to imagine. She smiled softly. "You're free now," she whispered. "That's all that matters." The wind carried the sound of his laughter through the open window. It was light, innocent, and full of hope. The woman looked up at the sky, now bright and clear. The nightmare was over. The truth had survived. And somewhere in the city, in a forgotten corner, the story that started with a single cry in the rain had become a symbol of courage, love, and the power of doing what's right. She thought it was just a baby, but that child had changed everything. And though the world would never know her name, her choice had saved a life. And with it, the future.